This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Anne Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Anne Pratt, formerly from South Africa, and relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Leadership Fellowship in Boston, Massachusetts, in the United States of America. Our bold young leader joins us today from the dynamic metropolis of soaring skyscrapers in the city of Toronto in Canada. She is a young African woman who shares an inspirational story of hope, faith, and grace. From her humble home in the country of Zimbabwe in Africa onto a TEDx stage and meeting the media mogul, Oprah Winfrey. At her young age, she is a coach, a millennial mentor for young girls, and a qualified medical doctor. She is a global media guest, a keynote speaker, and the recipient of the 2020 Woman of Influence Award, as well as the Top 4 Immigrant Inspiration Award, both awarded in Canada. You won't want to miss these spiritual awakenings and how she turned in her young life struggle into strength and pain into purpose. How her 14-year-old childhood promise to her mother became her guiding light in the world, and why meeting Oprah Winfrey awakened her power of belief, and why your story matters, because we are what we think. We warmly welcome Dr. Nothabo Ncube, and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. So Nothabo, what a great joy to reconnect with you today. I'm so happy you're coming on to have this conversation with us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Anne, for having me. I'm humbled.
You know, Nothabo, the first time I met you, I was so taken. I remember we connected actually on LinkedIn, and I read your story, and then we reached out and connected, and we had a conversation. And you've had such a remarkable journey. I know in your own personal life, you know, you have quite a significant crucible, a turning point. Can you share that moment, a moment of promise to your mother, and share with us, you know, when was that? What happened? What was the promise you made, and what was the difficulty in that moment?
Thank you, Anne, for taking me back to that moment. It was actually in 2003. And at the time I was in boarding school, and we were in church, and the boarding master came into the church, and they asked the pastor to call me out, and so that way I could go outside of the church. And then the boarding master said to me, "You have to go home." He didn't say why. He just said I should go back into the dormitories and get my toiletries and then go to the school gate. As I was walking towards the dormitories, you know, for some reason, I felt that something big had happened, because the boarding school that I attended, they would not let you go home, especially on a Sunday. It was considered to be a day of worship, a day when we surrendered to God. So nobody was allowed to leave the premises of the school unless there was something important that, you know, would have been happening at home.
Yeah.
As I'm walking towards the gate of the boarding school, in my mind, I don't know why this thought came on me. I literally say to myself, if I see my mother's car, it means she's alive. But if it's not my mother's car, it means she has died. As we're approaching the gate, I noticed that it was my uncle's car. So that for me pointed out that the chances were high that my mother had passed away. And then when I got into the car, energy in the car was weird. You know, I could tell that my uncle was trying to be calm and be positive, but I knew that something was wrong. And then he greeted me and asked me how school was going. And I expressed to him that school was going okay. And then he said, "Oh, well, your mother was involved in a car accident. And she's experiencing an injury in her brain. So she requested that she wants to have a conversation with you, just in case she doesn't make it." But I think really that was my uncle's way of preparing me for the tragic news, because she died on the spot. So when I got home, that's when I found out through my brother that my mother had passed away in a tragic accident. Now, in that car, there were roughly about 16 to 20 people, and she was the only one who died. At 14, and you don't imagine that your mother would die.
Yeah.
You don't imagine either that your mother would go through so much pain to the point that she would die on the spot. My mother was full of so much life, so much energy, zeal for life. She was one of the least expected people to die at the time that she died, because everybody felt that she still had so much more to give to her community, to give to society. She
Yeah.
was a great teacher. She loved to teach. She
Yeah.
brought out the best in kids, to the point that the kids that she taught would come out number one in the city where I grew up, which is Bulawayo in Zimbabwe. And when her day of burial came, you know, we were in the church and everybody was doing body viewing. And I believe I was one of the last people to go. So my aunt, who was sitting close to me, asked me if I wanted to see my mother. I hadn't seen her. So I said yes. And then when I was doing the body viewing, I drew in closer to her coffin to see her. And as I was watching her lying down in her coffin, Spirit allowed me to say a promise to her. And, you know, the words that came out of my mouth as a promise to my mother were, "Mama, ngiletemba," which means, "Mama, I'm hopeful." I continued and said, "I will try by all means, and I'll strive, and I'll strive to be a doctor." Those were my last words to my mother. That was my promise to my mother. But looking back at that moment, and I often ask myself a lot of questions. How could a 14-year-old child in that moment of pain could have summoned the courage to make a promise to her mother, but to even say, "Mama ngiletemba," which means hope? What hope was I talking about when I was in pain? When my life was falling apart, literally right before me. And the irony too is that my father was already in Canada at the time. So we were alone in Zimbabwe with my mother, my brother and I, and
Yeah.
my dad was already in Canada. The goal was that my dad was going to apply for us to join him. But it is true again that out of pain, something beautiful can emerge. Because for me, that promise to my mother has served as a guiding light in my journey, allowing me not only to fulfill the promise I made to my mother, but to also unfold a spiritual journey, which has led me into a position of giving back to society, giving back to community through leadership. I thank the forces that be, the voices of my ancestors, the voice of my destiny, that allowed that moment to manifest in the way that it did. So I could stand in the truth and in the pain of my story as inspiration, as empowerment for that girl child who doesn't know if they're going to make it to the other side, for that boy child who doesn't know if they're going to make it to the other side, for that mother, for that single mother, for that single dad who needs hope. That's why I'm here, and to use the pain of my journey to serve as a reminder to others that there is light in the tunnel, that if you're strong enough to channel that pain and make something more out of it, you will find your way. You'll find your way back home to your true self.
Well, you know, that's a remarkable story, Nothabo. And first of all, I'm deeply sorry about your loss. She was a remarkable human being who played such a significant role in your life. I was curious to know, what was the light bulb moment? What was that point of revelation for you when you understood that despite this pain, there is this statement of hope?
It was that moment of making a promise to my mother. You know, and at the time I made a promise to my mother, I didn't realize how that promise was going to serve as a guiding light in my journey. But what I do remember is that when I went back to boarding school, when I got there, the boarding master said to me, you know, it's part of growing up, mntanami, yukukhula, meaning it's part of growing up. Sometimes we're faced with such pain, but life must continue. You have to do your best. And immediately I went to class. And I remember standing outside. And at the time I was going through one of my darkest periods. It was right after my mother had passed away. Being young at 15 years old, the only thing that I could have possibly held on to at the time was that promise. I remembered the promise I had made to my mother. And I said, I have to keep on going because I made this promise to her. For some reason, I also believed that she was guiding me.
Yeah.
I don't know why I believed that, but I believed in that strongly, that my mother was with me every step of the way. I've experienced a lot of light bulb moments as it connects to that promise which I made to her. But those light bulb moments have come on me, especially when I'm walking through my darkest period and I need something to anchor me. I need a voice to anchor me. I need a hand to hold me together, to keep me together.
What are the anchors?
For me, the anchor is Mama Ngiletemba. I will try by all means, and I'll strive to be a doctor. That is the anchor. Those words have never left me. And as I shared with you earlier, Anne, that those words have taken me on a spiritual journey, on a spiritual path, which I didn't imagine before. And the work that I'm doing now connects to that promise. I do what I do. I'm a voice. I speak, I coach, I mentor because of that voice that spoke in and through me as God at 14 years old. So that promise is my anchor. And that's why I always tell people that your pain is your launching pad. Your pain, your trauma, your struggles are your greatest gift.
How did you transition out of that moment of pain? What were the key steps that helped you transition from that moment of pain as a 14-year-old to your graduation day?
Right. I believe for me, it was, for starters, staying focused, believing in myself, and surrounding myself around the right people, positive people who were able to encourage me, to empower me, to inspire me, and to push me so that way I could actually become a medical doctor. When we arrived in Canada, we lived in community housing. A lot of kids who lived there came from single parent homes. There's a program that I got introduced to because I lived in that catchment area, and the program is called Pathways to Education. That program, Anne, was my saving grace. They literally became that mother that I didn't have, in the sense that they provided me with the mentor, with the tutor, and with just mental support, you know, as I was unfolding that path. It was through Pathways to Education that I got a full ride scholarship into McMaster University. It was through Pathways to Education that I was able to go through my pre-med sciences, so that way I could make it into Windsor University School of Medicine. So I would say really it's important that you surround yourself around the right people, the right organizations that are going to support you. And also the truth about it also, Anne, is that when you're true to yourself, when you work hard, the universe has a special way of aligning you with the right people, with the right voices, and the right opportunities as well to catapult you from where you are and to where you are supposed to be. It works together.
Of
So
course.
I always say the power of your gift, of your voice, makes room for you in the world.
Yes.
That has been true for me.
And this Pathways of Education, was that an organization that was brought in to help people who were living in this community housing environment in Canada?
Yes.
It was.
So Pathways,
Okay.
yes, it was. Pathways to Education
Yeah.
is a program that caters to low-income homes. So basically what they do, they try and close the gap that
Yeah.
exists in those homes where there's one parent. So they provided us with tickets to go to high school
Yeah.
and with scholarships and bursaries. So that way we could
Yeah.
actually attain an education, because you have to recognize that when you're coming from a low income home, it is hard to even sometimes access certain financial assistance because you don't open meet the requirement. So Pathways to Education was that bridge of hope. It gave us the tools that we needed, considering the fact that we were coming from a low income home. And even the work that they're doing now, I believe now they are national, all over Canada. They now have a lot of different locations where they cater to kids
Yeah.
who want to go to school but don't necessarily have the financial means
Of
to
course.
be able to do that.
How do you define hope?
Hope for me is what keeps me inspired, what keeps me positive, what keeps me seeing something that is bigger and greater than my current circumstances.
Yeah.
That's what hope means for me. Through all these defining moments, having been down to nothing, having lost my way and my voice, but still managed to get here, still was invited to be a part of Oprah Winfrey's live class. That means there's hope. That means there's something.
I think it's a wonderful story. What led to the moment of being part of Oprah's program? What happened?
It was in 2011,
Yeah.
and on the 12th of October,
Mhm.
actually, that's when I met her. But leading up to actually going on the Oprah Winfrey website, it was because I didn't have money to go to medical school. So I was talking to one of my friends at the time who suggested that I go on the Oprah Winfrey website to look for any scholarships or bursaries that were available who wanted to further their studies. And when I went on the Oprah Winfrey website, there was nothing related to scholarships or bursaries. The first thing that popped up was tell us your story. You
Yeah.
become what you believe. And to be honest, Anne, I knew that I had made a promise to my mother, but I hadn't evolved to a place where I actually thought I had a story to tell.
Yeah. Yes.
I was an African child who grew up in Africa, who didn't know or understand the power of storytelling. And having grown up in Africa, I was conditioned to believe that there were only about 3 or 4 career choices, which was becoming a medical doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, or an accountant. So I had never been exposed to speakers and coaches and mentors and so forth. I actually didn't realize that people can have and create a lucrative career through that, through using their gifts. So at this point in time, I didn't even know I had a story. I didn't even know I had a
But
gift.
you told your story. You went on to Oprah's site and you shared your story.
Right. That was because of the fact that Oprah Winfrey said, tell us your story. You
Yes.
become what you believe. So
Yes.
for me, that's what led me to dig deep. I said, oh, I might have a story. I
Yeah.
made a promise to my mother when I was 14, and I'm studying medical school now. You become what you believe. So for me, it seemed aligned, to what
Yes.
they were looking for.
Yeah.
And I quickly typed in my short story about how my mother passed away at 14 and how I had made a promise to her to become a medical doctor. and how I was studying medical school at the time. They called back. And I think the irony about them calling back as well was that I had put down my cousin's phone number and they were calling my cousin. And
Yeah.
so the first time they called, my cousin thought it was a prank call. So she didn't even ask me about it. Then the second time they called, she said, "Did you send anything to them?" I said, "Yes, I did." But I didn't think they were going to call back. So I didn't let you know about it. And then she's like, "Oh, they called." Then I was like, "Oh, wow, I hope they call again." And then fortunately, they were able to call again.
Yeah.
And that's when my cousin was able to transfer my number to them. Then I was able to have 2 series of interviews with them. And that's what ultimately landed me the once in a lifetime opportunity of being a part of Oprah Winfrey's live class on You Become What You Believe. And
How long was the class?
right. Well, the class was an hour long. It was on the 12th of October, as I said. So they'd invited roughly about 30 to 40 women, I believe. And it was 30 to 40 accomplished women. I remember I was the youngest in that room on that day.
Yeah.
And I was 22 years at the time. And for me, being in that room, in that class, listening to the story of Oprah Winfrey, about how she came from rural Mississippi and emerged as a voice of hope and inspiration for such a time. But also listening to stories of other incredible women, other incredible voices
Yeah.
who were in that room
Mm.
on that day served as a reminder to my 22-year-old self that I too had a voice, that I too had a gift,
Yeah.
that the hand that life had dealt me with leading up to that moment was preparing me for something that was greater and bigger than myself. That's when truly I experienced a spiritual shift in my understanding of my mother's death. That's what led me to the place of recognizing that I had a story,
And what you,
that yes, I had a story to share.
yeah.
Because truly leading up to that moment, I knew I had made a promise to my mother, but I really didn't recognize that there was a story that was unfolding, a beautiful story, which one day I would use,
Of course.
you know, to inspire people, to give people hope, to empower humanity, and to help people rise in consciousness. I didn't recognize that till that moment. And of course, even going there, what I truly needed was money to go to school. I ended up not getting any money from Oprah Winfrey, but what I received from her was the gift of enlightenment and tapping into your own unique power to manifest whatever it is that you needed. That has remained in me since that opportunity when I met her, leading up to this moment where I continue growing and evolving into my highest yet to be. And now, as we had discussed earlier, that I'm considering, moving to South Africa where I'll be able to do more work which centers around empowering the next generation.
What lives with you?
It'll be that she said, you already are that which you see deep within yourself.
Can you share with us briefly, what are the big strategic challenges you see for leadership in the world today?
The big challenges that leadership experiences today is that we lack authentic leadership. We lack accountability. We lack authenticity. We lack truth. We lack courage. We lack service, the power of service, the power of heart, being able to give to people from a place of pure intention, from a place of service, from a place of love, of grace, of humility. I find that leadership nowadays is self-absorbed.
Yeah.
And I've been in so many different rooms, and God has positioned me in one of the most prestigious rooms where I've met women who work with the United Nations. I have been on some of the biggest stages in the world. And one common thing that lacks, as I'm being critical of what I see and experience when I'm in those rooms,
Yeah.
is that most leadership that we see, it's not about the people, it's about them. about me, not we.
Yeah.
And that leading us to really, then where is the spirit of Ubuntu? I am because you are.
Yeah.
That's why when you're being positioned in a position of leadership, it's because you're being called to serve,
Of
to
course.
help,
Yeah.
to be the bridge for the people who don't have a voice, for the voiceless, for the underprivileged, for the underserved communities. So how then are you closing that gap? How then are you helping the people that need your voice the most? And I haven't, seen a lot of that being reflected in some of these rooms. And the constant question, especially for young leaders like myself who are coming into these spaces now, is are they creating room and space for us to show up in our authenticity, for us to show up
Yeah.
in our truth and in the spirit of service?
Yeah.
Because it's really hard, and when you show up in those rooms and you can see that in spirit, the intention is not aligned.
I think if we think about some of the big challenges in the world today that are calling us all out to lead, what are the big factors that you think need to be addressed? When I say the big factors, what are the big challenges? What keeps you awake at night? Is it climate change? Is it this huge disparity between rich and poor? What are the big issues that really keep you awake at night?
For me, it's the huge disparity between the rich and the poor. How are we showing up for people who don't have, like myself?
Mm-hmm.
People always say that I'm one of the few, right? But it shouldn't be that way. One of the things about leadership that we have to be cognizant of is that when we see certain leaders standing on a podium, on a stage, there is this false mentality that we have that they are perfect. Nobody's perfect under the sun. But what we do want is somebody who's going to be accountable, is somebody who's going to be authentic, somebody who's going to be transparent, somebody who's going to stand there with the intention of helping the masses. That's what we truly want in all different facets of life. Hire everybody at their best in their true authentic power. For me,
Yeah.
I don't like the disparity that exists between the rich and the poor, and I don't like the fact that much of the society that we live in, we are controlled by the titles, we're controlled by money, we're controlled by power. But really, can we get to the crux of who people are and inspire people to operate in the vein of helping and serving their communities and the world at large? That's the world that I dream of.
So Nothabo, I mean, those are some really important thoughts around the quality of leadership and how we show up. I think just moving back to the world of work, can you share with us just a brief account of a moment in work that was really difficult? What was that moment? What did you realize in the moment in terms of how you could show up in an authentic way, and how did you pivot out of that?
I would say that the moment for me was with one of my mentors at a time, somebody I met through Pathways to Education. At the time I was applying for an opportunity, and I felt that I wasn't being considered because of the color of my skin. And so I approached him. I
Was
was
this
very
as a medical doctor?
No. So this was when I was still in medical school,
In
and
medical school.
this was an opportunity for me to work in the hospital over one of my summers. But it was such a great opportunity. I was going to be working at one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, Sanofi Pasteur, in Canada.
Canada.
Yes.
Okay.
So I believe it's the largest pharmaceutical company in North America.
Yeah.
And the opportunity was coming in through the organization. But everywhere you go, and people are going to narrow down the number of people that are applying. Every organization has a criteria that they're going to use, right? And so for me at the time, I felt that I wasn't being considered because of the color of my skin. And I approached my mentor, was very transparent about what I thought.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, Thabo, I don't believe that's the reason why you were not being helped, because I didn't feel that I was being supported at
Yeah.
that moment in time." And but he was very clear on it. He said, "I don't believe that's the reason why the lady was not forthcoming in terms of helping you. I think she recognized that you're a gifted student and that you could really do it on your own."
So he wasn't
And
acknowledging the fact, I mean, he had a different perspective, a different perception.
you did. You
Okay.
did. He did have a different perception. And that is usually the case with life.
Mhm. Sure.
And people usually have different perspectives about
Sure.
different incidences, right? So in that moment, he felt that I was wrong. But I think the way he went about it was the fact, really is what inspired me. He called me into his office and called the lady who was supposed to be helping me into the office. And we had an open discussion. And that conversation really led me to a place of recognizing that sometimes I can easily play and use the racism card when it's not necessarily the case.
What was that moment when you realized that, in fact, you'd drawn this conclusion of the racism card being made, and that wasn't the case? What was that moment?
Because the lady was able to share with me why she wasn't helping me at the time.
And what was the
Um,
reason?
her reason was that she knew that I had what it takes to do it on my own.
What was the outcome?
The outcome was that I ended up being the selected one, actually. I ended up getting that position, and she didn't even help me. So I did it on my own. They just submitted my application, and I was the applicant that was selected for that role. So which worked out,
Yeah, well,
which was
congratulations. But, how did you feel? Was her response, did her response give you that reassurance?
it did.
And what was
And
the takeaway? What did you learn from that?
to approach all situations in life with an open heart, and not to judge certain people just because they don't look like you. And truly, that woman, she meant what she was saying. And because even up until today, we're still connected,
Yes.
and she had helped me even after the fact with a lot of other speaking opportunities and so forth. So I know for sure that she meant what she said at the time. And I remember when I got invited for the Oprah Life class, she celebrated me. She was sharing with
Yeah.
everybody.
But it also sounds like your mentor, there was something about the way he facilitated the conversation that also enabled
Oh,
you
for
to reach that
sure.
point. So what was your brief takeaway from him?
My brief takeaway from that conversation was that it's very important that we don't assume, that we allow ourselves to talk, to have conversations,
Of course.
to let people know when
Yeah.
something doesn't feel right to you. Let people know
Yeah,
and give people an opportunity to explain themselves,
of course.
you know, because sometimes we are guided, and the way we act and the way we behave is also informed by our individual personal life experiences. So sometimes what I may read into as that may not be necessarily that, it can be something else. So I needed that conversation with my mentor and the lady, and that really helped me to see through that situation through different eyes.
I'm with you. I mean, that's such an important lesson, Nothabo. Just moving across the continent a bit, I know you visited South Africa in 2017 and you had a speaking engagement there. I mean, Zimbabwe is just north of, South Africa's borders, but Nelson Mandela has also been a leader you've alluded to earlier. He's been a great icon for so many of us in the world. What was your specific Mandela moment? Can you just take us back in time, a moment where, the gift of Mandela, or Madiba as we call him, really kind of touched your heart, struck a chord? When was that?
Right. For me, it was in 2017. I had just had a speaking engagement at Centon Convention Center. And afterwards, the host decided to take us on a tour of South Africa. And one of the places, that we're going to go and visit was Robben Island in Cape Town. When we got there, I think it was just arriving at Robben Island, and the place that we wanted to visit, of course, was where was the cell that Nelson Mandela was in for the 27 years of him being in prison. And when we got there, the tour guide actually was in prison at the time that Nelson Mandela was there. Just being there and listening to him narrating the stories that led them to being in prison at the time, but also explaining and sharing eloquently and powerfully how Nelson Mandela was different in comparison to everybody else.
What did he say?
When they were put in prison, it was a lot of them. But Nelson Mandela in prison was treated differently in comparison to everybody else. And then I asked the question, why was that? And he said Nelson Mandela was different. He wasn't angry. He was calm. He was fighting for justice, for truth. He wasn't angry at a white man. No, he was just fighting for justice, for equality. That's all that he was fighting for. So even his aura, his energy, his presence there, they too could feel that it wasn't a fight against another human being.
It wasn't a personal issue between him and a prison warder.
No,
It was bigger than that.
Powerfully put, and it was bigger than that. And they felt it, they knew it, and it was in the way that he carried himself while he was there in prison. He wasn't angry. He kept on emphasizing on that he was not angry. He was at ease with himself. He was calm. And I think that was also demonstrated by his presence even after, when he was out of prison. He came out and he wanted togetherness. He wanted people to come together as one. That was his message of hope. We are one. We are the same. He just didn't want a situation where, or a country, or the world to treat a black man any lesser than a white man, or anybody treating a white man in any lesser way than a black man. He just wanted justice. And that for me stood out to me about who he was as a person, and just the fact that the people that had put him in prison could see that as well. And
the other inmates in prison. I mean, it sounds like, your guide who was a fellow prisoner, did he share anything around what other prisoners learned from Mandela and whether they shifted their way of being?
No, the truth about it is that he explained that not other people were not yet where Nelson Mandela was.
Of course.
So originally, a lot of people didn't even understand how he was so calm about everything that was happening at the time, and how he was willing to even listen, but to also, be anchored in that spirit of oneness. Because with other prisoners, they didn't want to hear that, they were angry, but he wasn't angry. So they didn't receive him in the vein that we see through it now. It's only now that they're able to look back and to discern the power of his character, his humility, the love in him, the purpose that was invested in him, that truly was the connecting thread. His message of hope, his message of oneness has literally spread all over the world. Here in Canada, we have a school named after Nelson Mandela. There's a school here in Canada. It's called Nelson Mandela.
Yes.
Right. And so, but all these things go on to show that his impact was huge. His impact transcended what we could have possibly imagined at the time. His purpose was bigger than life, you
Is
know.
that what you took away from that moment?
That's what I took away
That's
from
what
that
you took
moment,
away. Okay.
that his purpose transcended anything that we could have possibly imagined, and that his purpose, his spirit, his energy was bigger than life. He
Yeah.
was truly called to be that voice of hope, to be that voice that would bring all of humanity together as one.
I mean, when you came back from Robben Island that day,
Mhm.
how did you feel?
I had mixed feelings, and I think seeing his prison cell and imagining that he had spent 27 years in prison, it was painful to receive, but also to recognize that there is a price that some people have had to pay so that way we could get here. And that price was paid by people like Nelson Mandela, who fought hard and were willing to put their lives on the line, be in prison for 27 years. 27 years is a long time,
It is.
but still embody that spirit of love, of calmness, of oneness. I think it takes a special human being to have that, to be that. I believe that's what he would have wanted all of us to do.
Yeah.
That moment truly, it inspired me beyond words.
It's a wonderful moment, and
Yeah.
it's a moment of truth, you know. What motivated that decision? You know, you've been in Canada a long time, you've traveled to different countries in the world, you have this global international experience.
Right.
What precipitated, just very briefly, this kind of decision to move back to Africa, and particularly South Africa?
Right. You know, and I've done it all. You know, I am thankful to God for the opportunities that I've had. I shared with you earlier that I've had an engagement in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in Kenya, in Canada, in the US, in the UK. All these places that I've managed to travel, you know, have brought me to this place now of recognizing that my gift, my voice is valid, you know.
Yeah.
But I've also been highlighted on a lot of different platforms like Global News TV, on the international stage, TEDx, selected as top 4 immigrant women of inspiration all over Canada. I've also met Oprah Winfrey. So as I was looking at my portfolio, having that honest conversation with myself,
Yeah.
I'm grateful I've reached all these beautiful defining moments. But then there was still something missing, and I can, you know, share with everybody, I've been here, I am this, I'm Dr. Thabo, I'm this. But what truly was missing was the impact of my voice. I started asking myself the big question: where are you most needed? What is your why at this point moving forward?
Yeah.
What do you want to do? How do you want to be remembered? Who needs you the most?
Yeah.
And it grew on me that it was Africa that needs me the most.
Yeah.
And why South Africa? South Africa is going to be the leading African country to help all of Africa to awaken to a deeper truth about who we are, but also the power of who we are, the power of our voices, the power of our gifts, of our talents. And I felt that that's what Africa needs right now. And in whatever way I can contribute positively, in whatever way, in my small way, I felt strongly that that's what Africa as a whole needs. And South Africa became, you know, the most logical location for me to take.
I'm super excited for you, Nothabo, and you know, I think South Africa is lucky to have you. So, you know, I'm sure that's another wonderful new chapter in your journey.
Yeah.
I really wish you well, by the way. I think it's going to be exciting. I can't wait to catch up with you once you back, you know, once you're in South Africa, and some of your experiences, within the medical services sector, which really the broader masses of people, so I'm super excited for you, and I think South Africa's lucky to have you. Just a couple of fun sort of facts. You've lived in so many different places. Just briefly, what has been a very happy memory for you in Canada? Just what has been some of, just a moment that has been particularly happy for you in Canada?
My happy moment has been through Pathways to Education. Pathways to Education still works with me right now moving forward. So I'm actually an ambassador for Pathways to Education now, which really the role centers on empowering the next generation of youth and, being a voice for them, advocating for them, and sitting on different tables to figure out ways in which we can support youth. God can dream a bigger dream for you than what you see and imagine for yourself. You have to recognize that when I moved to Canada in 2006, that's when I was introduced to Pathways to Education.
Yes.
And in 2006, Pathways to Education was about 3 years old. So now it has evolved into a national organization.
Yeah.
Where a lot of multi-million-dollar companies are invested in that organization.
That's wonderful.
And there I am, an ambassador.
Yeah.
So I recognize the divine synchronicity in that life already knew who I was.
Yeah.
This is not a relationship that started today. I'm a Pathways to Education program alumni, but the fact that divinity saw it fit that I would be aligned to Pathways to Education at the time that I was aligned to them, grow and evolve with them, leading me to this moment when I'm also able to give back into the program, into the youth that I enrolled in the program, but also how Pathways to Education has literally propelled me as well in the space that I'm in now. I think that for me is consciousness manifesting itself in the unconscious, because I wasn't aware that Pathways was going to grow into everything that it is now. Matter of fact, I came in alignment with Pathways to Education because of where I lived. And so that for me now is reminding me that even coming from that poor environment, that poor catchment area was a gift.
I'm with you.
Which has helped me to awaken to who I am because of that alignment to Pathways to Education.
That's wonderful. That's really great. So that for you has been a particularly happy moment. Let's go back to Zimbabwe just very briefly. What's one thing about Zimbabwe you would like people to know? What is unique about Zimbabwe?
It's their culture, the spirit of Ubuntu. I am because you are.
Yeah.
I believe that Zimbabwe embodies that in so many wonderful ways. In Zimbabwe, if I don't have enough salt, I can go to my next door neighbor and ask for salt. Whereas in Canada, I don't feel comfortable with doing that. Something as small as that, but it's big in a different way. Yes. So I would say it's the sense of community, the sense of I am because you are, that exists in our culture.
Yeah, and having traveled to Zimbabwe a lot and spent quite a lot of time there, I can certainly talk to that. And really the culture of the people, very embracing, very warm, very kind. I've experienced that there too. Just final thoughts. You talk about being an ambassador for the youth. And again, just very briefly, if you could share in our final closing thoughts, what do you think the youth of today would like to say to our generation?
I would say that the youth of today, they want to say to this generation that all they need is an opportunity to lead, is an opportunity to bring in the new, that what they bring to the table is solid. And good enough to serve, to be seen, to be heard, so that way their gifts and talents can fully manifest.
Well,
That's what I think they
yes.
would want.
Well, on that very inspiring note, Dr. Nothabo Ncube, thank you so much for sharing your story. I can't wait to hear about the next chapter as you travel back to Africa and practice medicine again. And just thank you so much for coming and sharing your story. You truly are an embodiment of hope.
Thank you so much, Anne, for having me. It's been such an incredible honor being here with you.
Thank you. Dr. Ncube's conversation struck a nerve. Death and dying is a tough topic, a difficult concept, and a harsh reality. How many of you, like me, falsely believe that we will live forever and that we're immortal until there is that big wake-up call, that life shock moment? As a cancer survivor working through surgery and chemotherapy, I personally know how surreal and unreal that moment can be. Dealing with grief and loss, which comes with death and dying, extends beyond the physical loss of a loved one. It could be the breakup of a friendship, the breakup of a relationship. It could be the loss of a financial fortune, or the loss of a job, a career, a sense of cultural identity, or even a set of personal ideals. The American Swiss psychiatrist, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, published a popular book called Death and Dying. Despite the critics, it was not intended to be prescriptive. Instead, it was descriptive of different emotional and mental states that her terminally ill patients went through. Not necessarily all of them, and not necessarily in a particular order. The gift of her work helps us identify these different emotional and mental states, and in so doing, we're able to define them, to work through them, and to deal with them, to process them. These states include denial, is this real? Anger, why me? Bargaining, if I eat a little better, can I live a little longer? Depression, why bother? Acceptance, it is the way it is, which is a powerful statement of reality. Additional work revealed a sixth mental state, finding meaning, turning grief and loss into purpose. Dr. Ncube's 14-year-old promise at her mother's deathbed to be a medical doctor helped her lift out of a state of despair and grief and loss. It gave her life meaning, and it inspired hope. And you too can turn pain into purpose, or tragedy into triumph, and despair into a future of hope. So until next time, remember that leading boldly is about making clear, thoughtful choices. And bold leadership is about taking bold action, just one small step at a time. One step for you, but together, one giant step for humanity. So take care and take thoughtful, bold action.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog, and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on anne-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.